The design isn't perfect. It runs low on power as it approaches Fulgora, but as long as the ammo belt feeding the turrets is more or less saturated, then it can do its job. I have no idea what is going on with these spasming fast inserters on the corner, and I'm just going to overwrite them with bulk inserters and hope it works out. Solar power is weak in the orbit of Fulgora, but at this point in tech, it's kinda all I got. You can't put steam boilers up here, so you can't get power from asteroid carbon and water. Not yet, at least. In retrospect, you're probably supposed to use nuclear, but without the advanced asteroid processing recipes, I'm just gonna not. For now, I'm just gonna have to suck it up.
Injecting love!
I just had to land on the one pointy bit. Okay, I specifically set up accumulator production on Volcanus, but forgot to set them up to be imported from there, so I didn't get any. Same deal for the processing units, so now I can't make any recyclers until I sort through some scrap. Best laid plans and all that. Thankfully there's some vault ruins not even one screen away. I need bricks for these lightning rods, and I don't have any fuel for furnaces, so that'll have to be imported as well. With the Mondor back at Volcanus and loading up with supplies, I finally get my head around the correct way to feed these thrusters. Rather than an overflow valve, we're going to use a little thing known as pulse width modulation. I originally went into a lot more detail about how it works, but decided to make a separate video on it instead. Micromanaging your thrusters like this is super unnecessary, but I like the challenge and wanted to figure out how it worked. Now that the milk run has made its way back, it's time to get Fulgora up and running. And I still forgot the processing units. You can get processing units from scrap, but it's a 2% drop chance, so I need to break down about 300 by hand before I have enough to craft one recycler. If I may make a suggestion, make it so Fulgora and Vault Ruins drop a single recycler, because this is just stupid busy work. Now, the randomized nature of scrap output on Fulgora leads to an interesting logistical challenge. How do you sort and ship randomized outputs at differing ratios without your belts or containers getting clogged up, and do it all with an incredibly small footprint? Well, the easy answer is logistics networks. Grind it all and let the bots sort it out. I won't be doing that though, at least not as the primary method. A lot of people were really angry when Dosh did that, and honestly, I'm curious as to how you're intended to do it without bots. Well, the answer is circuits and trains. But 90% of Fulgora is an ocean of heavy oil, so I need to automate overhead rail supports and ramps back on Volcanus. And the coal and acid is finally starting to run low, so I use bots to remote extend the base towards those nodes I captured. I also spend way too long slapping as many panels and accumulators as I can on the Mondor, making no small amount of mistakes along the way. Anyway, the answer to mixed output is mixed delivery. Sushi belt carousels. I'd do the entire base on the same carousel, but the ocean of heavy oil makes trains pretty much a necessity. I start by having bulk inserters pull a stockpile of materials from the sushi belt, and then after that section, any materials still on the belt above a specified threshold are fed into recycling loops. Most materials can be functionally removed from the game by doing this, although more complicated products like circuits and LDS make it more of a pain to make a system that won't jam. 2.0 added a new annoyance to carousels. If a lane on a belt becomes 100% saturated, then that lane will stop moving. This is an annoyance because it means that product will stop reaching the point on the belt where it would be taken off to make space for new product. You could be smart and calculate the total capacity of a belt as being its total length times 4 for each lane, but instead, I'm just gonna wing it. Dosh's "if everything was on a sushi belt" base would have broken in an incalculable amount of ways if this restriction existed in 1.0. It feels kinda fun policey, but unnecessary restrictions in order to force a specific solution is something of a blinding failure in Space Age's game design. I don't need to be too meticulous with the planning here. So long as the machine simply works and only jams every couple of hours, it'll be good enough, at least for now. The backbone of the entire production chain is going to be a train with a shopping list fed from this stockpile. This train will carry everything. I'd love to make a single train per resource, but there is not nearly enough space for that many train stations. It takes a while to program correctly, and still is far from perfect. but it's a variation of the supply train system I invented during my space age exploration run, and adapted for my video on personal logistics trains. The train is programmed to have a list of contents that it wants to contain, and once it's parked at the station, anything lacking from that list will be placed on a belt set to read contents, and eventually deposited in the train. The contents of the belt itself are subtracted from the train's requests, and is to be assumed to be deposited before it leaves, so overfeeding won't be much of an issue. A design this complex is subject to being edited and refined over dozens of hours, and more than a few of my viewers say that steam starts to shoot out of their ears when I discuss my circuit logic. So just know that it's a supply-demand circuit with the supply inserters set to set filters, and the filter signal is both the highest and lowest demand item on the list at any given time, set by a pair of selector combinators. I didn't really know what these things were for when 2.0 launched, but honestly, they are invaluable. I filter it by highest and lowest, so that if the item in highest demand runs out, it won't just completely stop feeding all items. It's unlikely that both the items in highest and lowest demand will run out at the same time. And when there isn't a shortage, it just straight up doubles throughput. In order to save space on the ramps per station, I will be using a reverse train here, although at least one station still needs to be able to accommodate the locomotive in order to fuel it. The second stop on the train line will be to create holmium solution, plates, and supercapacitors. This means shipping in holmium ore, ice, and stone just to start. It's also going to be on a carousel. The supercapacitors need copper and plastic. Without any coal on this planet, the plastic comes from LDS, but that mostly returns copper, so I ship the LDS over to the capacitor plant and void it on site in order to ratio it more correctly to the plastic demand. Steel production back at the scrap plant is also low enough that I'm packing the byproduct steel back into the train for use elsewhere. That's the advantage of using an everything train. You can take things off and put them on at the same station. All these intermediate products are made using electromagnetic plants, and that takes refined concrete. I could source and build refined concrete on Fulgora, but the water cost is a bit high for my liking, and I'm already producing this stuff in the thousands on Vulcanus as a byproduct. I don't care how many rockets it takes to send up enough of this stuff, Vulcanus can handle it. I also need green circuits for the supercapacitors, so that means breaking down advanced circuits and voiding the byproduct. I later pivot to breaking down blue circuits. They provide much more green circuits, and I already had the tools to break down the red circuit byproducts anyway. Scrap isn't literally infinite, but it is functionally infinite. And the amount of it that you need to churn through the holmium it yields means that wasting millions of resources is not only expected, it's damn near required. Holmium has a 1% drop chance per piece of scrap, and I'm going to need thousands of the stuff. Thankfully, your average scrap patch is somewhere from 15 to 30 million units, and these big mining drills drain it at half the rate, plus productivity bonuses. I'm not really too worried about wastage. Now I've got a slow trickle of everything I need for electromagnetic science, and this big flat island up here looks like a likely spot. This station is going to make accumulators by offloading batteries and gears, which I'll recycle to plates. Normally, gears are condensed plates, so it's more efficient to ship or belt gears over plates where possible. Strangely though, 16 gears reduces to 8 iron plates using a recycler, and gears have a stack size of 200, while plates have a stack size of 100. So it really doesn't matter if you ship plates or gears, so long as you recycle the gears on site. With a third station on the railway, I can now add a second push train without their schedule getting locked up due to train limits. Oh yeah, this also means I need to actually bother with train signals. I don't pretend to be an expert on train signals, and I'll later run into a little trouble when removing the train limit from these stations to run the loop at higher speeds, but I get it to be good enough. Alright, there's a problem. These trains are designed to stop at the loading station until they experience inactivity, but the incredibly slow trickle of holmium ore can't keep up with demand, and is getting the stations stuck there forever as a single holmium ore comes down the ramp every 10 seconds. The drop rate of holmium is low enough that this isn't really going to be fixed anytime soon, so I just start setting maximum wait times. I think I've demonstrated how you can get around Fulgora's scrap mechanic without bots, but if I were to do it a second time, I'd definitely do it the lazy way. This is just not great. I see a lot of people complain that Fulgora was a slog for them, and while it's not as generally disliked as Gleba, I can already feel it setting in. I'm something of a specialist at building compact, but even I think this is too much. I've got a slow trickle of the pink drink flowing now, which means that the next priority is a rocket silo. LDS and processing units are just reduced from scrap, so 2/3 of a rocket is already solved. I just need rocket fuel. That's as simple as melting down ice and using it to crack heavy oil to light and then mixing it with the solid fuel that also comes from scrap. All of which is coming on the same train. Another challenge of Fulgora is that centralized power production is pretty much impossible, because power poles can't traverse the ocean, and you can't landfill over it yet. That's really what's stopping me from going global and building an enormous network of trains from island to island. That is the plan, but it's a plan for later. For now, I just have to limp out enough delicious crushed cream soda to get the planet-exclusive tech. I'll start by researching better lightning collectors. With Volcanus mostly sitting on its hands right now, I give it something to chew on. I copy and paste the Mondor and name the new platform after another poorly designed little cargo hauler you may have heard of. This ship is going to automate delivery of metallurgical science from Volcanus to Navis. I also spruce up Volcanus with more beacons and automate prod and speed 2s. And the main carousel is flooded with LDS. It took hours, but production finally exceeded demand. This is going to happen a few times, but the answer is always to add more recyclers. Pink science is accumulating really slow, and I just worked my way through all my backed up resources, so it's time to think bigger. I need a few thousand more potions before I can build rail supports in deep ocean, but I can't afford to wait that long, so I go swimming for a nice fat island with an attachable scrap patch. And this is where I endeavor to create the world's most wasteful machine. I also copy-paste the Mondor again to create a ship for personal and logistics transports while the Mondor takes over duty of automatically shipping electromagnetic science. Say hello to the Spruce Moose. Hop in. I said hop in. This scrap patch is going to produce 2 full green belts of scrap continuously until long after I die. That's going to get fed onto a 1-to-4 reverse train and then shipped about 500 feet northward where it's unloaded into a massive recycling facility. I didn't bother with any ratioing here. I'm taking the brute force approach. These trains will depart on a timed schedule and never properly fill up, but it doesn't matter because they will continuously be able to consume 2 green belts of scrap without backing up. I screw up the design in a few places while building, but the basic concept of this system is that each item that can be returned from scrap is getting approximately 4 recyclers. If an item reaches the last recycler in that series, the belt detects it and then pauses that belt until it's removed. Items taken off the belt into these recyclers are then put through a recycler loop so that they are voided from existence. This is really easy with something like steel, which just reduces into less steel. But for something like LDS and blue circuits, it requires a lot of head scratching to come up with the most efficient system. Each of the 4 output belts gets its own line of recyclers, because I was terrified of it getting clogged up, but after the easier processes it's necked down to 2 lanes for the more difficult items to be voided. My brain was working at absolute capacity throwing this thing together, and I had to take a break for lunch to shrug off the headache, but once it's all in place, the damn thing just works. Mostly. I made 2 small errors. The first was that voiding stone is actually so simple and easy, I forgot to implement it. But thankfully I can just shove that in after everything else. The second was that I dramatically underestimated the time it takes to recycle concrete, but we can fix that with speed modules, beacons, and doubling the amount of machines dedicated to it. This likely would have been less of a problem if I had done this process before necking down the belts. What was the purpose of this machine? Well, it makes holmium ore. More precisely, it turns 120 scrap a second into 72 holmium ore per minute. I also made it to potentially produce LDS and blue circuits for building rockets, but the overflow gets voided. I also left myself a bit of space to pull additional product off if needed. The holmium ore goes into a 1-to-2 reverse train, which I inelegantly routed up to the supercapacitor plant. Remember when I said that it was important to reinforce your walls with gun turrets? Well, the biters back on Navis just reached the point at which a line of flamethrowers isn't enough, and they're tearing my North Copper mine a new one. I could do something about it, but it doesn't threaten my main base, and I don't want to, so I won't. Now that holmium ore has been solved, Pink Science is actually bottlenecked on batteries, so I zip back over to the Great Garbage Machine and reconfigure it to ship out batteries alongside the holmium. Super quick fix. Mech armor takes 5,000 pink potions to unlock, not accounting for lab productivity. So I spend legitimately 4 hours or so futzing around with incredibly boring optimizations getting my pink drink SPM up to about 120, only to realize that I'm now being bottlenecked on utility science due to the fresh copper shortage. Utility science takes LDS, which is incredibly copper heavy. Turns out I actually needed that northern copper mine to get the proper throughput, but by shipping over boatloads of Prod 2s and Assembler 3s, I can alleviate that somewhat. Honestly, I should have just started shipping over utility science from Volcanus. Also, I'm heavily modding and beaconing these 2 science machines to save on footprint and extra logistics considerations. And the amount of accumulators needed to maintain this is insane, even with upgraded lightning rods. Accumulators are an ingredient in electromagnetic science, so every time I expand power storage, I'm basically costing myself SPM. I'm not gonna ask what the hell's even going on over here. My Navi space is basically down to sub 500k iron ore, not counting the mostly untouched starter patch. As much as I'd love to just hop on the Spruce Moose and gun it straight for Gleba, I'll need to revise Navis and shore things up a bit before moving on. Before that, though, there's a few things I want from Fulgora, at least for now. With mech armor slowly on the way, it's time for personal battery 3s and Roboport 2s. These take supercapacitors and superconductors, and I haven't set those up for export yet. I also get really bored and just start paving the place using byproduct concrete.
SCV ready.
Goodbye, Fulgora. I'll be back to make you actually good when I unlock foundations. Step 1 of upgrading Navis is to automate shipping of supplies from Volcanus to Navis. Artillery and turbo belts for one, but also elevated rails. You're obviously not supposed to ship elevated rails via platform, but Volcanus can handle it. Okay, maybe Volcanus can't handle it. The turbo belt of coal coming in from the mines is starting to get fully consumed by my prod-modded oil refineries, and the plastic I need for processing units is choking. Also, I've started to exhaust the tungsten mine. I can fix all of these problems remotely. In fact, I can't foresee a circumstance in which I actually need to set foot on that planet again, but it's a delay to my plans I wasn't expecting. Now begins the long and spaghetti-filled process of tuning up the Navi space with the new tech I've unlocked. Big mining drills will let these ore patches last dramatically longer, which is good, because I hate dealing with biters. It's a chore, and it's a chore that I'm going to criminally neglect going forward. The fun thing about elevated rails is that you can just bypass your walls completely rather than build gates around the rails. I really wanted those artillery components to start coming in on the regular, but with Volcanus bulking, I suddenly remember that I have a hideously over-engineered, tileable Kovarex build lying around. Stockpiling nuclear armaments sounds like a good idea. While that's cooking though, since I have a mech suit, I'm actually a fairly formidable counter-biter vehicle just walking around. As long as there aren't too many spitters, you can assault biter bases from hovering over water, and there's not a whole heck of a lot they can do to fight back. With some space cleared, I run some rails into a new iron mine. The 4 massive iron patches in the main base have finally met their end. If you follow my content, you'll know that I'm something of an expert in supplying these outposts with a wide variety of different defensive supplies using a minimum of infrastructure. But what you may not know is that I'm incredibly lazy, and therefore, while I'm blueprinting this base to have gun turrets and mines, I'm actually going to be defending it with flamethrowers and a few laser turrets because screw it. If the iron patch dies, it dies. I can rebuild it later. Get used to this laissez-faire approach to biter defense. From here on, stuff is just going to be exploding in the background a lot, and I'm going to do the absolute bare minimum to address it. A lot of Navi still operates on Assembler 2s. I can cut a lot of pollution and add more productivity by upgrading with imports from Volcanus. Huh. My electromagnetic science is halted. Yep, we're back to Fulgora. That giant machine I made to process holmium and batteries, there are a few design flaws that only surfaced after a soak test. Copper wire from the green circuits created by breaking down blue circuits weren't dealt with in any way and just accumulated in the literal hundreds of thousands in the background until the chests were saturated. I forgot to leave a tank with a roboport for remote construction, so I had to fix it manually. Also, I ratioed the recyclers in LDS wrong, and it couldn't keep up with my copper plates. My lovely audience informed me that there are a lot of less than intended shortcuts to voiding items on Fulgora, such as crafting concrete into hazard concrete before breaking it down, because hazard concrete crafts really fast, but breaking it down is net negative. I wish I'd known about that prior, but I'm not editing the machine to incorporate it because it's working and that means don't fix it. Also, the 16 iron gear recyclers weren't sufficient for the surge in production from this process being backed up for so long, so they get speed beacons. It is a nice stress test for how much this thing can handle, though. Okay, so I took a break for like a month and got to thinking that novice could really use some tuning up with electromagnetic plants. They have a 50% productivity bonus like foundries, and perhaps most importantly, they can make circuits. If you're even passingly familiar with Factorio, you'll know that maybe 70% of your total raw material production goes into circuits. I was just going to ship holmium plates for these back to Navis and build them on site, but no, they can only be manufactured on Fulgora. Also, I think it's more efficient per rocket to send the plants. There's a problem with that though. I'm making the EM plants down here, and the launch pad is 2 train stops away. So the EM plants need to be shipped by train. I won't bore you with the specifics, but basically, I finally use my brain and program an inserter to regulate the contents of the supply wagons so that they only ever contain the exact amount specified, even if the supply belt sends an overflow to it. This allows for more efficient use of the wagon's 40 slot capacity. That purple chest is called an active provider, by the way. You may have never seen one before. With dread in my heart, I queue up the research for discovering gleba. The main carousel is choking on concrete. And I'm not going to mention it every time because it happens with virtually every possible product at some point, but just know that if a few hours on the playtime statistic disappear into the aether, it's because this thing broke, and I had to add a new recycler chain to fix it. I set up a machine to make hazard concrete and then void it. I really should have just colonized a new island and made a better system with more space and better tech and planning. But that sounds like work, and the puzzle of trying to figure out how to jury-rig what I have that is already working to work better is half the reason I play the game. Dan Olson, creator of the channel Folding Ideas, refers to this kind of commitment to an awful but technically functional design as a bespoke inefficiency. A problem of one's own making that simply becomes too big to ever deal with, and therefore becomes a fact of life. That speaks to me on a very spiritual level. With a few dozen EM plants in my back pocket, I set out overhauling the circuit production line back home. With something like 80% productivity and a faster crafting speed, they'll chew through fewer resources and bump up throughput. EM plants take a lot of power though, as you'd expect, so I need to double my reactor. As I do, I get really confused as to why my alarm for lack of nuclear fuel starts going off, and then I realize it's because I copy-pasted the alarm too. A big consideration for circuits is the ratioing for copper wire assemblers. Assembling copper wire decompresses it, and demand usually kicks up to amounts high enough that belts begin to bottleneck how much wire can be fed to assemblers making the chips. So direct insertion is usually best. However, EM plants can make copper wire, and will get the prod bonus for doing so. This change alone is probably going to cut my copper consumption in half. I ride the Spruce Moose over to Volcanus for a supply run before the inevitable, and then it starts choking on power again. Even with the extra sulfur spot, our powerful thirst for acid is too strong. The solution is, as always, more speed modules. And capturing a third well. A lot of people complimented the first part of this series by saying I actually play fairly fast, despite me claiming otherwise, but seeing as we're currently at 69 hours, nice, and we still have 2 planets left, I hope you can see where I'm coming from. A lot of the time is just spent tweaking minor stuff to be more efficient and fixing errors I've made, such as accidentally sending too many supplies to the platform. Screw it, I'm not cleaning this up. Let's go to gleba.